The 10 Amazing Mysteries about the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Today, we embark on a journey through the corridors of time to explore the 10 amazing mysteries about the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Prepare to question what you thought you knew, unearth hidden truths, and confront the shadows of the past. Number 10. The Legacy of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. The figure of the Pharaoh of the Exodus, though not precisely identified in Egyptian historical records, becomes a powerful symbol of oppression and tyranny. The absence of direct archaeological evidence confirming the events as narrated in the Exodus has not diminished its cultural and religious impact. Instead, it has stimulated an ongoing dialogue between faith and history, where the value of the narrative lies not in its historical verifiability, but in its power to inspire, teach, and console. Within Judeo-Christian traditions, the Pharaoh of the Exodus is often seen as the embodiment of resistance against divine will, an antagonist whose defeat manifests God's power and protection towards his chosen people. This narrative serves as a reminder of divine justice, liberation from oppression, and the importance of faith and obedience. In Islamic tradition, the story of the Exodus is also recounted in the Quran, with some variations. Here, the Pharaoh, Fir'aun, is presented as a tyrant who declares himself a god and faces the consequences of his arrogance and denial of the truth sent by Allah through Moses, Musa. The Quranic narrative emphasizes themes of monotheism, the struggle against tyranny, and divine mercy towards believers. Number 9. The impact of the Exodus on Egyptian culture. The ancient Egyptians maintained a selective historiographical practice, focusing on glorifying the achievements of their rulers and deifying their pharaohs. Military defeats, natural disasters, or any event that could be interpreted as a sign of weakness were rarely documented. This narrative bias could explain the omission of the Exodus, an event that, if acknowledged, would represent a significant divine and political defeat for the reigning pharaoh and Egyptian gods. For the Egyptians, whose records focused on pharaonic achievements and events reinforcing the state and religion, the Exodus might not have been considered an event of sufficient historical importance to be recorded, especially when compared to monumental constructions, victorious battles, and significant treaties that were documented. Moreover, the possible departure of a group of Semitic slaves or workers might have been seen as a minor event in the context of the vast Egyptian empire. Archaeology has provided limited direct evidence of the Exodus as described in the Bible. This is not unusual given the transient nature of nomadic camps and the difficulty of preserving material evidence over millennia. Furthermore, matching specific events with the archaeological record is complicated due to uncertainties in the biblical and Egyptian chronology. Number 8. The Persistence of the Pharaoh. From a theological perspective, the Pharaoh's obstinacy can be seen as a clash between divine will and human will. On several occasions, it is mentioned that God hardens Pharaoh's heart to multiply his signs and wonders in Egypt. This act serves a dual purpose: to demonstrate God's supreme power over the Egyptian gods and to reinforce the faith of the Israelites and the legitimacy of Moses as their leader. However, this raises questions about Pharaoh's free will and divine justice, topics that have been debated by theologians and scholars throughout the centuries. From a psychological standpoint, Pharaoh's behavior can be analyzed as a case of extreme pride and denial. Faced with Moses' demands, backed by miracles and plagues, Pharaoh refuses to yield, possibly not wanting to show weakness before his subjects or a foreign god. This continued refusal can be seen as a denial of reality, a desire to maintain control at any cost, even as his kingdom crumbles around him. This attitude reflects an aspect of human nature: resistance to change and fear of losing power and authority. Politically, Pharaoh's decision not to release the Israelites has significant implications for the stability of his kingdom. The Israelites represented a significant part of the workforce in Egypt, and their departure would have had a considerable economic impact, especially on monument construction and agriculture. Admitting defeat to Moses and allowing the Israelites to leave could have been perceived as a sign of weakness, not only in the eyes of external enemies but also internally, possibly provoking challenges to his authority. Number 7. The role of Egyptian magicians. In the book of Exodus, specifically during the initial plagues God sends upon Egypt, Egyptian magicians play a crucial role. These characters, often interpreted as priests or practitioners of magic, attempt to replicate the miracles performed by Moses and Aaron to demonstrate that the pharaohs and their deities' power is equal to or greater than that of the God of Israel. For example, when Aaron, by God's command, turns his staff into a serpent, the Egyptian magicians replicate this act with their own magical arts. The same occurs with the transformation of water into blood and the plague of frogs. These confrontations between Moses and the Egyptian magicians symbolize the struggle between divine power and earthly or magical powers. The magicians' ability to imitate the first miracles highlights the belief in magic and occult practices present in ancient Egypt. However, as the plagues become more severe, the magicians can no longer replicate the miracles, demonstrating the supremacy of God's power over any human ability or magical practice. In ancient Egypt, magicians or priests played important roles in society, not only as intermediaries between the gods and the people but also as healers, astrologers, and keepers of esoteric knowledge. They were seen as possessors of secrets and rituals that allowed them to interact with the supernatural world. This context helps to understand why the magicians attempt to compete with Moses and Aaron. It was their role to defend the spiritual and political power of the Pharaoh. Number 6. The economic and social consequences of the plagues. The Egyptian economy was heavily based on agriculture, sustained by the cycle of the Nile River. Plagues such as hail, locusts, and darkness could have ruined entire crops, causing widespread famine and severe economic losses. The plague that affected livestock would have devastated not only the provision of meat but also milk, hides, and other products. Moreover, livestock was essential for agricultural work and transportation, further complicating economic recovery. The death of the firstborn, as the final plague, was not only a severe emotional blow but also an economic one. By eliminating many of the heirs and key workers in one night, the continuity of businesses and the management of lands and livestock were significantly disrupted. The psychological impact of the plagues, along with the perception that the pharaoh could not protect his people from these disasters, could have undermined faith in Egyptian leadership and religion, leading to potential internal conflicts and questions of authority. The loss of slave labor, with the eventual liberation of the Israelites, would have required a significant adjustment in the economy and society. Tasks that these slaves performed needed to be distributed differently, possibly increasing the burden on lower-class Egyptians. The magnitude of these catastrophes could have affected Egypt's position in the ancient world, weakening its trade relations and military power. The loss of the army in the Red Sea would be a significant blow to its defense capability and power projection. Recovery in agriculture and the economy in general would have required a reorganization of available resources, perhaps fostering innovations in agricultural techniques or in economic management. Egyptian society, known for its resilience and adaptability, might have sought ways to integrate and understand these catastrophes within its religious and cultural framework, possibly adapting its religious practices and understanding of the gods. The lessons learned from these plagues, whether interpreted literally or symbolically, have been passed down through generations. This legacy serves as a reminder of human vulnerability to the forces of nature and the importance of faith, hope, and resilience in the face of adversity. Number 5. The disappearance of the Egyptian army in the Red Sea. The book of Exodus describes how God, through Moses, parts the waters of the Red Sea to create a safe path for the Israelites to escape the pursuing Egyptian army. Once the Israelites have safely crossed, the waters close over the Egyptian army in their attempt to follow, completely destroying it. From a faith perspective, this event is seen as a miraculous act of God, an example of his power and protection towards his chosen people. It's a testimony to the faith and obedience of Moses and the Israelites, as well as a manifestation of divine justice. The crossing of the Red Sea has also been interpreted as a symbol of baptism and purification, representing the transition from slavery to freedom, from oppression to salvation. Explanations involving natural phenomena such as strong winds, changes in tides, or even seismic events that could have caused the temporary retraction of water, followed by its violent return, have been proposed. The exact location of the crossing has been the subject of debate. Some suggest that the event took place at a location in the Red Sea with particular topographical and meteorological conditions that would have facilitated this type of natural phenomenon. Some scholars and theologians argue that the significance of the narrative lies more in its symbolic and spiritual meaning than in the historical or scientific details of how it occurred. Number 4. Moses and Pharaoh. Moses, born a Hebrew, was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in the Egyptian court as one of their own. This privileged position within the heart of oppression makes the relationship between Moses and Pharaoh unique. Moses grew up understanding both the Egyptian culture and the identity of his original people, placing him in a unique position to mediate between God and his people, as well as negotiate with Pharaoh. Moses' mission, dictated by God in the burning bush, made him the spiritual and political leader of the Israelites. His divine mandate was to free his people from slavery in Egypt, which inevitably put him in direct opposition to Pharaoh. This confrontation was not just between two men, but between two ideals: divine will versus earthly power. The biblical narrative describes how Moses, accompanied by his brother Aaron, faced Pharaoh repeatedly, demanding the liberation of the Israelites. Each refusal from Pharaoh led to one of the 10 plagues that ravaged Egypt. This sequence of events shows not only Pharaoh's stubborn resistance but also Moses' unbreakable determination, strengthened by his faith in God. The interaction between Moses and Pharaoh goes beyond historical or mythological account. It symbolizes the struggle between divine justice and human arrogance. Moses represents obedience to divine will and compassion towards his people, while Pharaoh embodies tyranny, resistance to change, and defiance of the divine. The story of Moses and Pharaoh teaches us about the power of faith and perseverance in the face of adversity. Moses, despite his initial doubts and reluctance, becomes an instrument of liberation and justice. The relationship also underscores the importance of understanding our identity and purpose. Moses, though raised as an Egyptian, does not forget his heritage and assumes his divine mission, highlighting the value of authenticity and commitment to a greater cause. Number 3. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart. In the biblical account, specifically in the book of Exodus, it is mentioned several times that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. This statement has led to intense theological debates about its meaning and implications for free will and divine justice. Some interpret this act as a demonstration of God's sovereign power, who, in his omniscience, knew Pharaoh's choice in advance, and therefore, his hardening serves to fulfill divine purposes and reveal his glory to Israel and the surrounding nations. From a philosophical perspective, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart raises questions about the nature of free will and predestination. Was Pharaoh free to make other choices, or was his destiny sealed by divine will? Some argue that this narrative reflects the complexity of the interaction between divinity and humanity, suggesting that, although Pharaoh had the capacity to choose, his decisions were influenced by his character and pride, which were used by God to fulfill his redeeming purpose. Historically, the concept of a God directly intervening in human affairs was common in ancient religions. The idea that a god could harden the heart of a king would not be strange to the contemporaries of the biblical narrative. In the Egyptian context, the pharaoh was seen as a semi-divine figure, whose decisions reflected the will of the gods. However, the Exodus narrative presents a direct challenge to this perception, highlighting the supremacy of the God of Israel over the Egyptian deities and his control even over Pharaoh's heart. Number 2. The Plagues. The 10 plagues of Exodus are one of the most dramatic and significant episodes in the Bible, representing the struggle between God and the Pharaoh of Egypt, and serving as a means to liberate the people of Israel from slavery. These plagues not only demonstrated God's power but also punished Egypt for its idolatry and resistance to releasing the Israelites. Each plague was loaded with symbolism and aimed to challenge specific Egyptian gods, highlighting their impotence before the God of Israel. Here's a closer look at the plagues, their possible explanations, and the symbolism behind them. Number 1. Blood. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 7 verses 14 to 24. The water of the river Nile turned to blood, killing the fish and making the water undrinkable. This event challenged the god Hapi, deity of the Nile, and Osiris, whose bloodstream was linked to the river. Number 2. Frogs. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 8 verses 1 to 15. The plague of frogs emerged from the Nile, affecting all aspects of Egyptian life. Hecate, the frog goddess associated with fertility and birth, was challenged here. Number 3. Lice. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 8 verses 16 to 19. Lice or gnats, depending on the translation, came from the dust of the earth, attacking both people and animals. This act challenged Jeb, the god of the earth. Number 4. Flies. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 8 verses 20 to 32. A plague of voracious flies affected only the regions inhabited by the Egyptians, sparing the Israelites. This event challenged Khepri, god of creation, the movement of the sun, and resurrection, often depicted as a scarab. Number 5. Livestock pestilence. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 9 verses 1 to 7. A deadly disease affected the Egyptian livestock but not that of the Israelites, challenging Hathor and Apis, divinities represented by cows and bulls. Number 6. Boils. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 9 verses 8 to 12. The ashes thrown into the air by Moses became fine dust over Egypt, causing boils on humans and animals. This plague was a direct challenge to Isis, the goddess of medicine and peace. Number 7. Hail. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 9 verses 13 to 35. The hail mixed with fire was so severe that nothing like it had happened in Egypt since its foundation. This event challenged Nut, the goddess of the sky, and Seth, the god of storm and disorder. Number 8. Locusts. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 10 verses 1 to 20. An invasion of locusts devoured what the hail had left, challenging Osiris, the god of vegetation and agriculture. Number 9. Darkness. Appears in the book of Exodus chapter 10 verses 21 to 29. A palpable darkness covered Egypt for 3 days, challenging the sun god Ra, one of the main gods of the Egyptian pantheon. Number 10. Death of the firstborn. Appears in the book of Exodus chapters 11 verses 1 to 10 and chapter 12 verses 29 to 30. The death of all the firstborn in Egypt, both humans and animals, represented the final blow against the Pharaoh and the Egyptian gods, especially challenging the protection they were believed to offer over the royal succession line. Number 1. The identity of the Pharaoh. Many scholars and researchers point to Ramses II as the Pharaoh of the Exodus for several reasons. First, his long reign, approximately 1279 to 1213 BC, matches the timeframe many scholars assign to the Exodus. Second, he was one of the most powerful pharaohs and a builder of great works, including the city of Pi Ramses, which is believed to have been built in part by Hebrew slaves. However, the lack of direct evidence in the Egyptian records about the events narrated in the Exodus, such as the plagues or the mass escape of slaves, causes some to question this identification. Merneptah, Ramses II's successor and possible son, is another candidate proposed due to the Merneptah stele, a monument that contains the first known mention of Israel outside the Bible, dating to approximately 1208 BC. This suggests that the Israelites were already established as a people in Canaan shortly after Merneptah's reign, which could coincide with the period after the Exodus. The reference to Israel in the stele indicates their presence in Canaan rather than their departure from Egypt, so the connection with the Exodus is indirect and subject to interpretation. The Egyptians rarely documented defeats or negative events that could tarnish the image of a pharaoh or the empire. If the Exodus occurred, it is unlikely to have been explicitly recorded in the Egyptian annals. The narrative of the Exodus is a deeply significant religious and cultural story. Archaeological evidence, which often seeks confirmation or correlation with these texts, rarely offers a direct and clear connection due to the nature of historical interpretation and the scarcity of contemporary records. Determining the exact chronology of biblical events is complicated, as dates can vary depending on interpretations of ancient texts and archaeological findings. This directly affects the identification of the Exodus pharaoh, as the exact period it would have occurred remains a subject of debate.